Hey guys, Jim here. Wanted to share with you now another acquisition of mine that's it's actually pretty special. It's not just any other custom knife. This is something that I feel takes the maker into a whole nother level. The maker I'm speaking of course, is Jake Hoback. And this is the OSF 3.5, which stands for Open Source Folder with a 3.5-inch blade. And we'll get to what the open source stuff means here in a moment, because this really is something fairly revolutionary for this industry and really shows the type of person that Jake is and the way that he likes to give back to the industry. So what we're looking at here is a really fast flipper, about 8 3/4 inches overall length. Now the blade, even though this is called a 3.5, it's got a 3.5-inch cutting surface. But the actual size of the blade from the very tip right up to where it meets up to the handle, up to the frame, is actually just about 3 3/4 inches. So this is going to play larger than many other 3.5-inch knives. Just to give you a quick comparison, here it is against my Crossfire, which is a 3.5-inch, and my David Clark Grunt, which is also a 3.5-inch. So you see both of those are far more compact than this one is. And that's partially due to the fact that the exposed blade is a little bit longer than 3.5 inches, but also because the handle, you've got 5 1/4 inches right here, so it does extend quite a bit to this little tail section here. So just to give you an idea, it is really going to carry more like a 3 3/4 inch bladed knife. What we've got here is, of course, let's see, the Hoback roller detent, which you can see right in there, which gives you some great flexibility. I've covered that detent in a ton of other videos. This is obviously not the first video I've done on Jake's work, but essentially instead of having a standard detent ball that just traces into the blade over time, what happens is this is actually a rolling detent ball. It's set within in this little post right here in this little cup, and it actually rolls, so it reduces the friction greatly on the blade as the blade is being opened and closed. And as you see, I have mine set as a really tight detent. You do have the ability as the user to adjust your detent strength to a degree. I mean, it's not going to go from falling open on its own to finger breaking from one side to the other, but you do have a degree of adjustability on to how tight you like your detent. I like mine a little on the tight side. When I first got this, it was a little looser. It still flipped just fine, but you could just do this and the whole blade would just fall closed under its own weight, which is wonderful. But I started playing with it and I really found a sweet spot for me, and it makes it a really fast flipper, having that extra little bit of detent going on. The finish that's done here is Jake's infamous Stoneage finish, FDE, which stands for flat dark earth. That's just the color. It's almost like a clay-like, mud-like color. But I really always wanted the Stone Age finish. I had seen him do it on a Quayback long time ago from the first batch, and I had seen him do it on some of the A-series knives. And I really wanted to have that, so when we discussed him building this custom for me, I said, I really don't care what you do. I said, but I would love to have the Stone Age finish done. And it's funny because it's a process that he rarely does, because he's not really a big fan of performing the finish, because he's a little bit OCD about finishing knives, and he likes a very uniform, very balanced pattern. And with the Stone Age finish, it's a very random pattern, so it kind of messes with his knife maker OCD a little bit, but I had to have it. I think it's a really cool finish. Very tough looking. And that's really what this knife is all about. It's going to be a super tough knife like Jake's other knives. It's meant to be kind of a workhorse, very strong, but it's fairly lightweight when you compare it to my Quayback. Now, this is not the same as the Quaybacks that are being released today, and I've done that comparison when I did the mid-tech video where I brought in a couple of the customs. Mine is over 3/4 of an inch thick. It's insane. It's very thick, very heavy. There's no lightning cuts on the back side of the titanium, just the two fullers on each side, or actually one on this side and two on this side. So mine is extraordinarily heavy, and I've held 4 or 5 other Quabacks, and mine is by far the heaviest I've ever held. So in comparison, this weighs almost nothing. He's done a great job of adding lightning pockets inside of the titanium handles. So while you do still have a nice big beefy knife, he's done so much lightning in there that this almost feels like something, built out of carbon fiber or something. I mean, it's got a little more heft than that. I shouldn't say that, but it certainly does feel like a much lighter weight knife than it should be. Now here's what makes this knife so special, besides the fact that Jake made it, and besides the fact that he did this great finish, and it's got this incredible custom pivot. It's the purpose behind the project. What he decided to do was to create this open source folder to help benefit up-and-coming knife makers, people that are learning how to make knives. And the way he tells me is this, he goes, it's pretty straightforward. I wanted to help the guys that are trying to build their very first folders. Maybe they're coming from making only fixed blades and they're trying to learn their lock geometry and they're setting their detents and everything else. Or maybe it's the first knives they're building, who knows. But he wanted to give them a hand in starting to build their first folders. And he says that I found out that when I first started building folders, the info was out there, but it was really far dispersed and hard to find. It was hard to find everything that he wanted to know in one area. So it took a lot of research, a lot of digging, a lot of talking to other makers to learn all the little, tips and tricks that it takes to make a really good performing folder. And he also said there's not a lot of info on why you do certain things, like cutting a lock angle a certain way, or maybe choosing a standard detent over a flat face detent, or why you may want to prefer using ceramic over steel for your bearings and detent. Little things like that. Everybody has their preferences, but nobody really just goes out there and puts a document out, a data sheet out, and says, I did this, and here's why I did it, and here were the performance differences. So he says, I figured why not give out a unique folder design, something that's a little bit different than everybody else's, and do a really good in-depth work-in-progress video, release the CAD files for this knife so that somebody can truly make this exact knife themselves. And the only stipulation that he has is you're building this for your education. You're building this for you. You're not going to take the information and try to build a business off of it. You're not going to build an OSF and start selling a whole bunch of them. That's not the intent of this project. The intent of this project is to help people with what some consider to be a dying art. I don't know that I would wholly agree with that, because there are knife makers coming up left and right, but perhaps it's less now generationally than it was in previous generations. I don't know. But what he wants to do is to foster the interest that people have in making their own knives and maybe becoming a knife maker themselves. And this is that way of doing that. It's teaching you. It's showing you all the little things that you need. He's going to be going step by step and showing you why he cuts his lock angles a certain way, why he prefers a certain degree of lock bar tension, why he does his relief possibly on the outside versus the inside. A lot of makers will argue about the strength and the overall longevity of the tension of the lock bar, depending on where you cut the notches. Maybe perhaps why he chooses to use the HRD over a standard detent, why he does a flipper tab the way he does, whatever. And by the way, speaking of the flipper tab, this is something that's been greatly discussed in my previous videos when I've shown the A8 and A10 and whatnot. They had the really, really big claw-like curved flipper. I mean, it was basically out to here. This is a reduced size flipper for him, very much in the same vein as the Quaback. It's nice and small, but it certainly activates it just fine. I'm not a fan of the larger one only because, it really curves heavily, so you're almost out there, but that's not the biggest deal. For me, it was when I was disengaging my lock, I was banging the very heavily curved flipper tab directly into the back of my thumb, into my thumbnail, and it got to be kind of painful. Here, it's something that I think overall is a great EDC piece. It may be a bit large for some people, again, because it really is a little bit larger than a 3.5-inch blade as far as the exposed steel. But for those that can easily carry a knife of that size, I think that due to the fact that it's got a great balance to it, that it's really super lightweight, that it's got a fantastic action, that Jake always chooses premium steels. I put my box away, unfortunately, so I'm having a hard time remembering. I'm pretty sure this was 4V steel on mine. I'll have to double check, and I'll try to put it into the description. Unfortunately, I just didn't even think about grabbing the box before I sat down to do the video. But he uses a lot of steels, 20 CV, 3V, 4V. I think he's done some 10V. He wants to find steels that are going to be super tough. They're going to hold an edge for a really, really, really long time and take a really nice fine edge. And he's not really doing a lot of fancy pretty finishes. Yeah, he does make some knives with a little bit more finish work than others, but really his knives, when you look at them, they look to fit the definition of what they are. They're a tool knife. You look at something like my grunt here, this is a lot prettier in a lot of people's eyes. Some people would buy a knife like this and never carry it, never use it. Well, it's too pretty. I'm afraid to screw it up. And then when you hold something like this, you're like, well, that looks like that should be in my pants every day. That looks like something that I should be cutting shit with every day. So it really does give you that tool-like appearance. Now, one of the things that I love is the shape of the frame here. It's very, very comfortable. What he's done is he's slightly tapered it toward the rear. Now, it doesn't get so tapered that it feels like the knife is going to come out of your hands. Also, the FDE finish gives you a little bit more, a little bit more tactility as well. But there's something about the way this fits in the hand that's great. He's created a thumb relief here. So your thumb drops into place that engages the jimping that's on the backside of the spine of the blade. And you can also choke up a bit on it. It's got more jimping up here. So you've got a little more reach this way. You've got a little bit more control and precision over the blade this way. As you see, as always with Jake's work, very thick stock on the blade. Great grind, insanely sharp. I've never seen anybody say, oh, I just got my Hoback and it's not really all that sharp. He makes some stupidly sharp knives. He really does. There is that fantastic pivot on one side. There is the other. Now it appears to me, and I've tried looking and I haven't seen anything on the inside, but it appears to me that this is going to be the one model that will not have any of the religious inscriptions anywhere on the knife. Usually he'll put, here we have right here, the psalm that's around the pivot. He'll usually put it there. Sometimes he has them on the inside of the frame. I've only ever seen one knife built by Jake that had 0 inscriptions, and that was the original #1 prototype for the custom Quayback just about 2 years ago. And that was the one that Jeff, our buddy Tough Thumbs, that he had. That was the only fully naked one that I'd ever seen. And he feels it's very important to put that a religious inscription on his knives because he feels that it's something that he's been blessed with a gift to be able to do what he does. And that's basically his way of putting it out there and saying thank you and giving respect for the gift that he was given. Now, I'm paraphrasing here. He has a different way of wording that. That's just my way of kind of encapsulating all of what he says into a shorter sentence. And I believe the only reason we're not seeing any inscriptions on here is because it's going to be an OpenCAD file that anybody's going to be able to use. And instead of having to alter it to not have that in there, possibly, I don't know. But this has no religious inscriptions whatsoever. Now, if you're one of the maybe 1% of people that I've heard that won't buy a Hoback because of those inscriptions, then the OSF is going to be for you. It doesn't have any inscriptions on there, and you can finally see for yourself the quality of a Hoback knife in your collection. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here, but I did want to say thank you to Jake for making this available to me. We've been talking about this knife for well over a year. I actually had to go back well over a year in my emails just to kind of reference a few things he had said about it. And I'm really glad to see that it's come to fruition. It's a very important project for him. It's his way of giving back to the industry. And in an industry where a lot of people just kind of take and take and take and take and try to get as much money out of every little fucking thing that they can, it's really nice to see somebody, especially at the level Jake is at. I mean, you know, his books are closed. His knives sell for, you know, 5, 10 times what they originally sold for. Okay, maybe not 10 times, but easily 5 times. You know, you take, for example, the Hoback. This is the one that's really going nuts right now. I'm seeing them go for, you know, $2,400 to almost $3,000. And, you know, when this came out, this was well under $1,000 by the time I got mine, and mine's one of the first 24. You know, it's still $1,200. But, you know, he's at that level where he could do whatever he wants to do. If he decided he wanted to make this knife and sell it for $2,000, he would have a line around the block because of the name that he's built, the reputation for quality and customer service that he has. But instead of doing that, instead of being a leech in the industry, what he's doing is he's doing his best to give back and to inspire other people to maybe take this up as a way of life. Maybe, you know, you're just going to be a hobbyist knife maker. Maybe you're going to do it part-time, but maybe you're going to be that guy that says, you know, this project has inspired me and I really enjoy doing it and I get it, I understand it, and I can do it well. And you could be, you know, a full-time knife maker, and you could be the next big thing. You could be the next Jake Hoback. You could be the next Todd Rexford. You could be the next Todd Begg. And maybe you didn't have that confidence before because maybe you live out in the boonies. You don't have anybody around that can kind of hold your hand and show you what needs to be done. Because listen, making a folder is tricky. And that's why it does irk me to a degree when I see somebody go, well, I just don't see how these knives are worth that much darn money. You know what? Go, you know, pick up that $50 knife that you think is the greatest thing in the world, and then go pick up a $1,000, $2,000 custom. And you will see that far beyond the materials, there is a tremendous difference between them. And it really is going to be in the knowledge that the maker possesses and how they're doing every little thing. Just the tension on the lock bar, the tension on the detent, the tension in the pivot, the lock angles, every little thing is something as minuscule as not making your back spacer 100% to spec from front to back, or maybe it flares out a little bit and you weren't planning on that. Then all of a sudden you go to open your knife and it only opens that much and you can't figure out why. Well, it's because this little fucker back here is changing how everything else works in this knife. It's the fitting of the materials together. It's, you know what? If you don't have somebody that's willing to teach you, that's willing to tutor you, it can be a rather daunting thing. And I think it does scare some people off. Well, now I think you're going to have a wonderful opportunity to learn from someone that's been doing consistently great work and then bettering himself every knife that he makes. And he's creating this where you can make your own version and use this as a tool to teach you how to become better and better. And for that, I think Jake is making a difference in the industry. So Jake, thank you so much for the opportunity to own this and for the opportunity that you're giving many people that want to learn how to become a knife maker. I think it's a really great thing to do. All right, guys, I will see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching as always.